We have to be very careful now, I think, in our relation with China, because, again, you now have this Asiatic alliance between China, Russia, and Iran. It is the most capable, let's say, adversary the United States has ever faced. Remember that when we faced the Soviet Union, their economy was never bigger than 1/3 the U.S. economy, the Soviet bloc versus the Western bloc. The Chinese economy, on a purchasing power parity basis, is roughly the same size as the U.S., and they've got more manufacturing capacity. So if you think about the type of manufacturing capacity the United States had during World War II, that now belongs to China, not the U.S. We have hollowed out
I just don't understand
manufacturing.
Why our foreign policy, Brad, I'll bring you into this discussion, why our foreign policy isn't being driven by some of the things that we could do together to collaborate on. Like we have global warming, we have, issues on this planet that we could collaborate on. And it seems like we're spending no time on those issues and saber rattling. Cuba, another example. Why can't we set a goal for the United States to normalize relations with Cuba and get them on our side, since they are the equivalent of, let's say, Ukraine, David, to America? You've brought up that comparison. Why don't we make peace with Cuba? Why can't we have a peace-based foreign policy where we're trying to build bridges? God, Cuba and the United States could do amazing things together, and we should be trying to win that relationship instead of living 50 years in the past over it. I'm not sure.
There was legitimate outrage over the past week because we discovered that China was planning on, they already have an intelligence outpost in Cuba, listening outpost, but also they were thinking about doing training of troops in Cuba. And that would be a violation of the Monroe Doctrine, and we should basically get our backs up over that. The Monroe Doctrine states that no distant great power can bring troops, weapons, or bases into the Western Hemisphere. The United States spent over 100 years basically enforcing the Monroe Doctrine. It would greatly diminish U.S. security if we allowed any foreign great power to have troops in the Western Hemisphere. So we deserve to have our horns out over that. The problem is that we have our horns out over everything, and so we're not really taken seriously. We've cried wolf so many times. I don't think we're really taken seriously by the Chinese on this. And this should be a teaching moment to the foreign policy establishment, because this is Russia's objection. Russia's objection is to having American troops, weapons, and bases directly on their border. This is our objection to what China is seeking to do in Cuba.
Okay, Brad, do you want to add something to that, or can we move to COVID?
Well, just real quickly, I would say, there's a real appetite in the business community to be engaged. This idea that we're going to decouple the world, never have to deal with these folks, right, is just a farce. ByteDance bought $1 billion worth of NVIDIA chips announced this week, right? Like the world is entangled. And I think we would be better off having our political and business leaders in more sync over how to achieve this long-term safety and prosperity, as opposed to what feels like a disjointed foreign policy relative to the global reality around AI and what's happening on the business front.
I agree.
Well said. Yeah. And I mean, it's just so obvious. Why can't we be collaborating on stuff? And we see when you and I made our trip to the UAE, and then we see the Saudis, bringing movies back. We have certain regions we're doing a pretty good job of engaging with. Engagement, reasonable engagement is a good idea.
It's because, and I think RFK has said this, we have created a very dangerous revolving door between our most critical institutions and the largest industrial companies in the United States. And that revolving door creates all kinds of conflicts of interest. And those things get sorted out via revenue and dollars and profits.
Incentives.
And so those incentives will drive us, if it's the military industrial complex, to go to war. And you're seeing that. It'll complicate our foreign policy. So this is why I've always said the most important thing that we're doing is something that the military industrial complex cannot stop, which is our energy independence. And when you have energy independence and abundant costless energy, I do think that the biggest thing you get is this peace dividend. You stop fighting these wars, you become much more rational abroad, and you're like, okay, I don't need to fight with all of these people because, things are so great within our borders.
You're so right, Jamal, because we actually have stopped those wars, and now we've created two other ones, Russia, Ukraine,
we can't help
Taiwan,
ourselves.
China. What's that?
We can't help ourselves, and we'll use the scarcity of commodities as a boogeyman to basically incentivize us to go in these foreign misadventures. And it really has to stop.
By the way, just two quick points on that. On Taiwan, there's an election next year, and it looks like right now that the pro-China party might actually take power. Right now, the party that's in power is more of a pro-Western party. And the reason, I think, is that the Taiwanese are looking at what's going on in Ukraine, and they're looking at the corpses of the Ukrainian youth pile up, and they're thinking maybe it's not such a great idea to be an American proxy state. Or in the words of Henry Kissinger, he once quipped that it's dangerous to be an American enemy, but it's absolutely fatal to be an American friend. I think that this war may be backfiring in terms of the incentives it's creating around Taiwan. Remember, Biden said that this war would basically help protect Taiwan by deterring China. It might actually deter Taiwan from opposing China. So we'll have to see how that plays out.
All an able-bodied person in Taiwan of voting age needs to do is read the newspaper and understand that in the last 2.5 years, we've essentially started a multi-trillion-dollar program to delever ourselves from all the critical resources that China and Taiwan gives us. And so if you're a Taiwanese citizen, the writing is unfortunately on the wall, which is that we are giving ourselves the optionality to not have to do anything. So to your point, David, if you're a rational thinking Taiwanese person, unfortunately, you're forced to be in a position where you may have to hedge your bets. And if the United States can basically have a chip supply that comes from Europe and Mexico, now all of a sudden the criticality of TSMC goes away. To wit, I published this tweet yesterday about Buffett and his trades in Japan, right? He bought these 5 trading companies. And it's just a really novel carry trade that I've really fallen in love with just understanding it. But the coda to that is that when he did this and going long Japan, what he actually also did was he delevered himself from China. He had a long position in TSMC and he said, I'm out. And when they asked him why he sold TSMC, he said, this is a very complicated thing. And he basically said that it's not a bet that's worth making. And I think underneath that, if I had to guess what he's trying to say about Taiwan indirectly through his sale of TSMC is the odds are that we are not going to get into a land war over there, which means that that asset and its equity value is in danger, and I don't want to own it. And I think that that's a very clinical summation of his rational action. So to your point,
well, here's what Blinken said.
People speak with their dollars.
I think this is very important. You know, the one China policy says Taiwan is part of China. It's not an independent country, but we've had a very ambiguous and tolerance for this ambiguity of Taiwan acting as its own nation while saying we support the one China policy. And that ambiguity has served us very well in the China relationship. Here's what Blinken said at the press conference, quote, we do not support Taiwan independence. We remain opposed to any unilateral changes to the status quo by either side. The status quo he's referring to here, Brad, is that they get to be independent in Taiwan, but we don't say they're independent. They are obviously acting in an independent manner, but it is not our business to tell the Taiwanese people that they're independent or not. It's their decision to determine if they're independent or not. Any thoughts on the trade by Buffett and Blinken's comment at the press conference and this ambiguity?
I think we want to maintain the ambiguity. I think we're basically saying to China, don't change the status quo, at least for now, right? While we rebuild these chip fabs in Arizona and other parts of the world. I think most of the wealthy families I've talked to from Taiwan believe that 5 or 6 years from now, the U.S. will no longer be in the position where they will need Taiwan and Taipei as much as they do today. And they're
How many years do you think it will take to be independent? Say it one more time and explain it. Yeah.
Well, it's not about being independent. It's how much longer will Taiwan have what they believe to be de facto protection from the United States. And I was told by one very influential Taiwanese family that they believe when the 5th chip fab comes online in Arizona, which I think is scheduled for 25 or 26, they intended to have most of their family members out of Taiwan at that period in time. Now, I think most Taiwanese don't envision this being, a violent invasion of Taiwan. It's more of a take under in the same way that Hong Kong was. And so I don't see an American president, frankly, going to war, nor would I want them to go to war over Taiwan.